The story opens in a fantasy world with a medieval setting, where we see a high school student named Rio lying down inside a bare cottage. The interior is almost empty, just a knife and 2 books rest on the table. Without paying much attention to them, Rio steps outside to get some fresh air. All he sees are towering mountains stretching in every direction. He looks down at his hands and says, "Water, come forth." A small splash of water appears in his palm, summoned by magic. This all began just a few days earlier, when Rio suddenly found himself in a blank, white space. As he tries to make sense of his surroundings, a celestial being appears and assures Rio that this isn't the afterlife. The angel, pleased to finally have someone to talk to, also breaks the news that Rio has died, hit by a truck back in his original world. Rio isn't too surprised and quickly figures out that he's been given a chance to live again. He casually refers to the angel as Michael in his head and asks what kind of life he should aim for this time around. Michael tells him to follow his heart. Rio decides he wants a peaceful, quiet life, nothing too flashy. Michael agrees and prepares to send him to a magical world called Fee. Before the transition, Michael gives Rio some background. Only about 20% of people in this world can actually use magic, but Rio will be one of them. He's naturally attuned to water magic. Since he asked for a quiet life, he's placed in a secluded area called the Forest of Rondo, living in a simple cottage. To help him settle in, Michael has stocked 2 months' worth of supplies inside a frozen storage hut nearby. He's also left behind 2 useful books, one about the world and another for learning magic. That's how Rio picks up his first spell, conjuring water from thin air. Fortunately, he doesn't need to worry about danger just yet. Michael has put up a protective barrier around the cottage to keep monsters at bay. Rio continues practicing and manages to summon water without needing to speak the spell aloud, just by visualizing it. Pretty handy. With this newfound ability, he fills the bathtub with water, though it's admittedly kind of strange, since the source seems to come from inside his own magic reserves. The water is freezing, so now he needs to figure out how to warm it up. He tries the classic fire starting method, rubbing sticks together, but it's a total failure. Frustrated, Rio starts thinking, maybe there's a magical solution to this too. Using the knowledge from his past life as a chemistry student, Rio separates hydrogen from oxygen, causing the water to freeze into ice. With the ice now in hand, he cleverly uses it to focus sunlight like a lens, eventually managing to create fire. Thanks to that fire, he finally warms up some water and takes a well-deserved, relaxing bath. Refreshed and clear-headed, Rio realizes he could have just reversed his ice-making method using magic to heat water instead. But he saves that thought for later. While eating, it hits him, he needs to start hunting soon or his food will run out. The problem is, stepping into the forest means running into monsters, and Rio knows the small knife Michael gave him won't be much help. That means he now has to figure out how to use combat magic. The next day, he starts practicing a simple spell, Water Ball. But when it hits a tree, it doesn't leave a scratch. So he adjusts it, narrowing the stream into an arrow shape. After hours of trial and error, he manages to produce a basic version of the water jet spell. Still, it's far from powerful, and the tree remains unharmed. So he shifts focus to ice magic instead, since water magic hasn't proven useful in a fight. He tries to create and control an ice crystal, but projecting it turns out to be harder than he expected. Despite the struggle, Rio eventually gets to the point where he can summon several ice crystals at once, though launching them remains out of reach. After days of non-stop effort, he finally gains the skill to form the crystals instantly, still not perfect, but it's enough to make do. Out of time and options, he decides to use the ice as a makeshift spearhead and heads into the forest. At a riverbank, he finds some quartz and feels a bit relieved. If he runs out of mana, he can still start fires manually. While gathering herbs, a monster known as a lesser boar charges at him. Frozen in fear, Rio nearly gets taken out before his instincts kick in just in time to dodge. This time, he fights back. He makes the ground slick with ice, sending the boar tumbling. Quickly, he summons sharp icicles that impale the creature, ending the threat. Rio pulls off some impressive water magic under pressure. But he knows he's far from ready. Back at his shelter, he flips through the monster compendium and quickly realizes the lesser boar is one of the weakest creatures out there. Determined to prepare, he studies the book, trying to understand what other dangers might lurk out there. When he gets to the dragon entry, the only advice given is to run, though it admits running probably won't help. Then he reads about something even worse, the Akuma. In that case, the book says not to run, just pray you never run into one. The book doesn't offer much guidance, but he keeps flipping through it anyway. The next morning, he gets ready and heads back outdoors. The day starts off well. He stumbles upon a tree filled with fruit. The first bite is pure joy, a small reward for all the trouble he faced the day before. The flavor alone feels like it was worth everything. Unfortunately, peace doesn't last long. A sudden attack from an assassin hawk knocks him flat. He quickly realizes he's completely outmatched. The bird is stronger, and it's using air-based magic that can't even be seen. There's no way to fight it head-on. He recalls something he read in the book and bolts, but outrunning a bird seems impossible. Eventually, realizing he can't escape, he stops and decides to face it. Using his ice magic, he freezes the hawk. Thinking he's won, he gets closer, only for the creature to shatter the ice. It's still alive, but now one of its eyes is badly injured. Recognizing that Rio has grown stronger, the hawk flees. Rio drops to the ground, exhausted, mumbling that the peaceful life he wanted isn't turning out to be so peaceful after all. Trying to return home, he soon realizes he's lost from all the running. While wandering the forest, he stumbles upon something terrifying, a Dullahan. The headless figure stands silently as smoke drifts from its neck, calmly tending to its horse. Eventually, he manages to find his way home. From that point on, he dedicates himself to improving. Whether it's battling wild creatures or fishing, his ice magic steadily becomes more powerful, strong enough to slice through a mountain. He keeps working to grow stronger, gradually adjusting to this unfamiliar lifestyle. Yet, each night he returns to the place where he first met the Dullahan. He doesn't go there to win, but because every clash with the creature seems to push him further. Oddly, there's no mention of Dullahans in the monster guide he's been studying. That could mean the Dullahan isn't actually a monster, or it's just not listed in beginner-level material. After yet another tough battle, he realizes something. Maybe the Dullahan keeps meeting him not to defeat him, but to help him grow. One night, he sees the creature form a blade out of ice. The Dullahan offers the sword to him. Understanding the gesture, he accepts it. After that, the figure silently vanishes. For the next few days, or perhaps weeks, things settle down for Rio. Until he comes face to face once more with an old enemy, the hawk. He's in the middle of training when the bird reappears. It's now missing one eye, and it's obvious this is the same hawk from before. However, it looks different, larger, darker, and more dangerous. It's evolved. It dives at him with overwhelming force. Rio quickly conjures a 5-layer ice barrier, but the hawk breaks right through it. He pushes harder, creating a 10-layer wall, but the hawk smashes through that too. As he unleashes his ice lancer, the hawk charges straight through the attack, aiming right for him. Losing balance, the support stick he relied on drops, and in a split-second decision, he grabs the sword he received from the Dullahan and strikes at the hawk. Surprisingly, the blade is effective. The hawk recoils but dives in once more. This time, he drives the sword deep into the creature, bringing it down for good. Walking over to its fallen body, he acknowledges the hawk's tenacity. After all, he did take its eye again. It had every reason to retaliate. But through this struggle, he grew stronger, and in that, he owes the hawk some gratitude. He realizes the hawk had evolved just to battle him, and in respect, he offers it a warrior's end, falling by his sword. He draws out the blade, and the hawk breathes its last. He then sets off once again, unaware of a powerful dragon watching nearby. Suddenly, the dragon approaches and speaks to him with an unexpected shock. Rio is stunned to hear a dragon's voice. The dragon, in turn, is relieved that he can use his telepathy once more. The dragon asks Rio if he's encountered a certain evolved hawk. Rio confirms he defeated it. Surprised, the dragon questions how Rio managed such a feat. Rio reveals the sword. The dragon immediately recognizes it as the blade of the Fairy King and wonders what Rio must have done to earn such a weapon. Rio, however, is just as puzzled. With his own questions answered, Rio asks the dragon a few of his own. They chat until nightfall before the dragon announces his departure. Before parting ways, Rio introduces himself, and the dragon responds with his name, Lewin. Life seems to be going exceptionally well for Rio in this new world. So much so that the angel who reincarnated him double-checks his divine record and finds something crucial he missed. Rio possesses a rare trait the angel hadn't accounted for, as no one sent to that world before had it: eternal youth. What does this power truly mean for Rio? How will it shape his future? Elsewhere, by a riverside, a red-haired boy lies motionless on the shore. Who is he? Early in the morning, Rio sets out on a routine trip to the shore to gather seafood but stumbles upon the remains of a wrecked ship. In true survival fashion, he finds a lifeless man near the debris. One look is enough to tell that the man's spirit has already departed this world. But then Rio spots another person, Abel, lying unconscious on the opposite side of the wreckage. This one, fortunately, is still breathing. To provide some background, Abel and a group of others were traveling on a boat when a freak storm erupted from nowhere. In the middle of the chaos, a monstrous sea creature, something like a colossal octopus, attacked, causing the vessel to split apart and send everyone overboard. Luckily, the ship wasn't far from the coast, which explains how they ended up washed ashore. At present, Rio has brought the still unconscious Abel back to his cottage and stepped out to take care of chores. Abel eventually wakes up, confused about his surroundings. Stepping outside, he's greeted by the sight of a beautifully arranged flower garden and a neat stone walkway leading into the woods, everything clearly handcrafted by Rio. Rio returns just then and is visibly relieved to see Abel awake, despite not knowing who the man even is. Abel is a bit shaken, not just from the situation but also because he didn't sense Rio's presence approaching. Could it be that Rio has some kind of detection avoidance ability? But what unsettles Abel most is Rio's full-on commitment to the stranded survivalist lifestyle. Abel thinks about asking Rio if he's some kind of wild hermit without proper clothes but decides against it, not exactly a great way to start a conversation. Instead, he introduces himself respectfully and thanks Rio, assuming he had saved him. Rio quickly corrects him, saying he just carried him back, nothing heroic about it. But Rio's tone turns serious when he reveals that all the other passengers didn't make it. Abel seems unfazed, telling Rio not to pity them since they were actually smugglers. He starts explaining more, but his stomach interrupts the conversation with a loud growl. Rio laughs it off and suggests they continue the talk over a meal. Now that some familiarity has set in, Abel finally asks why Rio doesn't have any proper clothing. Rio explains matter-of-factly that he simply doesn't have access to materials like fabric or thread. Abel suggests just buying clothes from a nearby settlement, until it hits him that Rio must be broke and living like a hermit for a reason. Still, he assumes there's a town not far from here. Rio clears up the misunderstanding by saying that there are no towns close by. That's why he's living like this, completely isolated. Curious, Abel asks how Rio manages to find food and supplies. What Rio says next floors him. He reveals that he's a water mage. This astonishes Abel, who mentions that even in the central province, only about half the people are capable of using magic. Rio feels disheartened after learning that he might not be as unique as he believed, especially since the angel Michael had mentioned that only 20% of people could do what he did. Still, Abel wants to investigate something further, so he asks Rio to take him back to the shipwreck site. When they return to the shore, they're surprised to find no bodies remaining. Rio guesses the sea might have dragged them away or perhaps monsters devoured them. This realization reinforces how lucky Abel was to be saved by Rio. Without his help, Abel likely would have met the same grim fate. Touched by this, Abel tells Rio that even though they barely know each other, he considers him a genuine friend. Abel searches through the wreckage but fails to find what he was hoping for. So, he decides to change plans and head to a nearby town called Loon, which he believes lies to the north. He asks Rio to come along and act as his guide, explaining that he has no clue where Loon is. Although Rio doesn't know either, he still agrees to help and says they can start the journey the following day so he can get ready. Abel accepts the offer and seals it with a handshake. That evening, Rio quietly says farewell to his peaceful life in Stardew Valley and ventures into the forest to also part ways with Dullahan, the legendary being who trained him. He informs Dullahan about his upcoming departure and promises to return someday. Grateful for all the wisdom and support, Rio requests one last training match with his mentor. They engage in a fierce final sparring session, going full force. As expected, Dullahan emerges victorious. Before they part, Dullahan gives Rio a farewell present, a proper hero's outfit, finally shedding Rio's ragged look. The next morning, dressed in his new attire, Rio sets off alongside Abel toward the north, officially leaving behind his solitary medieval life. Along the way, they're confronted by a wild boar. Abel takes the lead and, although he's unable to cast magic, he channels a sword technique to boost his agility and pierces the boar in one strike, killing it instantly. As they travel deeper into the woods, the forest stretches endlessly. They make camp that night beneath a giant tree. The following day, they stumble upon a pond, where they spot a pair of lizard men sharing a tender moment in the water. Abel chooses to avoid conflict, remarking that lizard men are formidable, and suggests taking a path to the left. However, Rio picks up on something using his detection skill. Several creatures are closing in fast. He suspects the lizard men might have noticed them. Abel steps forward to shield Rio, but Rio refuses to stand down, sensing that they're about to be surrounded. Abel doubts Rio's magic can help without a staff, but is shocked when Rio demonstrates that he doesn't need one. He can cast spells silently and effortlessly. Without hesitation, Rio conjures several sharp ice crystals and hurls them toward advancing lizard men, taking them down instantly. The battle that had left the confident Abel struggling is resolved in mere moments. Amazed by how quickly things ended, Abel turns to Rio and asks what kind of magic he just used, since it was unfamiliar to him. Rio downplays it, casually stating it was just a water lancer spell. While Rio doesn't see it as anything impressive, Abel is clearly astonished. He saw 4 lances appear at once. This contradicts what Abel knows about magic, particularly that most mags can only cast a single spell at a time. Concerned, he brings it up, and Rio, with a hint of amusement, points out that Abel seems unaware. Trying to shift the topic, Rio reminds Abel that he's not a wind mage, but a water mage. Before they resume traveling, Rio performs a short chant and summons fresh water to drink. He offers some to Abel, noting how exhausted they both are and how long the road ahead will be. Abel drinks, still silently uneasy. He'd noticed Rio's chant differed greatly from the ones he's accustomed to, but Rio offers no explanation. As they journey on and draw closer to the city of Luna, Abel hands Rio a coin, explaining it's accepted in Luna. Rio lights up with joy. This is the first money he's touched since arriving in this world. Noticing Rio's excitement, Abel goes on to explain that various currencies exist, and this particular one belongs to the Kingdom of Nightly, of which Luna is a part. He also tells him that the kingdom includes 3 main cities: Luna, the Handaloo Federation, and the Debuhi Empire. The moment Abel mentions Debuhi, Rio suddenly pauses. Sensing something off, Abel questions him. Rio denies knowing the place but admits the name threw him off. It sounded so odd to him. He jokes that introducing oneself as a member of Debuhi wouldn't sit right. Luckily, he's not from there. They both laugh it off and keep walking. As they pass through a rocky area, Abel spots something unusual. One of the rocks is moving. He attacks, and Rio quickly joins in, only to realize they've stumbled into the nest of rock golems. The creatures begin reforming after every hit. Abel charges at one, stabbing it with his sword, but it recovers instantly. Realizing physical attacks aren't working, Rio casts a 10-layered ice rock spell, smashing 2 of the golems to pieces. With success, he repeats the move against the remaining ones. When they approach the final golem, Rio notices it's lying still. Upon closer inspection, he understands why. It's flipped on its back. These golems draw energy from the ground, and without contact, they're powerless. They also discover a group of monster cores on the ground. Abel immediately recognizes what happened. The golems must have defeated several monsters earlier, and those cores are quite valuable. They decide to treat it as part of their journey's rewards. Rio thinks about grabbing more from the other golems but stops when he notices those golems battling the ice boulders. Not wanting to get involved, they quietly slip away. As they move forward, they spot another creature. Rio initially thinks it's just a frog, but Abel believes it might actually be a behemoth. Before they can even argue over what it really is, things escalate. Multiple wyverns appear in the sky, heading straight into the same area. It quickly becomes clear they've stumbled into a massive conflict. Fortunately, they realize that since the behemoth is also caught in this chaos, it won't go down easily against the wyverns. Their guess proves correct. The behemoth retaliates using powerful magic and comes out victorious. Rio can hardly contain his excitement at the strange things they've encountered so far. That evening, they sit by a campfire and talk. Rio jokes with Abel, saying he expected him to jump into the fight with the behemoth and give him a front row seat to a rematch. Though mischievous, it's clear he's only joking. Their conversation shifts to the behemoth's magic cancelling ability. Abel mentions he's only seen such things used in dungeon traps before. Hearing the word dungeon gets Rio curious. Abel catches on and asks if he's interested in such places. When Rio says yes, Abel tells him they're in luck. The only dungeon in the entire kingdom is located in Luna, the very city they're heading to. Rio teases Abel for not telling him earlier. Abel defends himself, saying he had no idea Rio was into dungeons. Rio, now suspicious, playfully presses Abel for more hidden knowledge. Abel asks if Rio has ever seen dwarfs or elves, adding that Luna is home to a number of strong dwarfs. Rio replies that he already knew, leaving Abel surprised and wondering how. Abel also mentions there's just one elf in Luna, and again Rio claims to know this already. As they trek through the mountain trail, Rio informs Abel that there's a human village just past the next hill. Abel, puzzled by Rio's knowledge, asks how he knows. Rio recalls that the dragon once mentioned it during a conversation, but realizing Abel wouldn't believe that explanation, he brushes it off and tells him to forget it. As they continue, a high-tier monster suddenly threatens them. Abel senses its immense presence and readies himself until he catches sight of the towering beast. Fear grips him, and even breathing becomes difficult. Fortunately, Rio acts fast. He distracts the creature by tossing some meat its way. The giant bird devours it and moves on without attacking. Abel is relieved and thankful for Rio's quick thinking. They press on, both disturbed by the strange events in that region. The creatures roaming this part of the world aren't ones normal people should be dealing with. Something feels very off about the mountain. Remembering the wyverns they saw earlier, they suspect the northern range might be their origin. Peering over a ridge, they spot a gruesome sight, a group of wyverns tearing into the remains of another large monster. They come to a mutual understanding. While Abel prefers avoiding confrontation, Rio is more inclined toward action. He argues that if they must engage in battle, now is the best opportunity, especially since the wyverns are grounded. They head into combat and manage to defeat their enemies. However, their relief is short-lived as a swarm of flying wyverns approaches. Reacting quickly, Rio unleashes his magic and takes them down mid-air, while Abel focuses on collecting the monster's magical cores. Abel, already riding the high of the fight, becomes even more exhilarated when more monsters appear. By the time the battle ends, both of them are exhausted yet energized, exchanging smiles that show how well they work together. Rio and Abel keep moving forward on their travels, chatting about whether it's worth the risk to ever encounter wyverns again. While Rio has no issue squaring off against such massive creatures, Abel would rather avoid that kind of threat entirely. Still, he admits he's grateful Rio fought them earlier. After all, the battle left them with a hefty bag of magic stones, which could fetch a fortune in trade. Their path takes them far north until they spot a narrow road ahead. This sight tells them that following it will eventually lead somewhere. Abel studies the surroundings, noticing that the road stretches toward what could easily pass for Mount Everest in the east. Deciding that's not their best direction, he suggests heading west instead. He recognizes the icy peaks in the distance but chooses not to share the details with Rio, only mentioning that if they did go east, they'd arrive at a town called Kailadi. Rio is delighted by the thought, admitting he's been craving the comfort of a real bed. Abel is taken aback. He's always imagined Rio as some wild fighter who cares only about battling monsters. Nonetheless, he starts offering recommendations about what to do in Kailadi, especially praising the local food, which he claims is outstanding. It doesn't take long before they reach the town. Their first stop is a restaurant, where Abel brings up the concept of adventurer guilds and suggests Rio sign up. He explains that the guild card doubles as identification and grants free access anywhere within the nation. Rio finds the idea appealing, especially since this time Abel had to hand over a silver coin at the gate just to get him inside. Abel goes on to explain another advantage: guild members can sell magic stones and monster parts, but notes that an alchemist can make the most out of such materials. Given Rio's love for chemistry, the idea of learning alchemy instantly catches his interest. Their food arrives, curry with rice. Rio is amazed that this world also serves a staple dish from his previous one. Muttering to himself, he notes how most isekai stories have protagonists struggling to recreate food from their original world, yet here in Fee, it already exists, something he considers a blessing. He devours the meal eagerly, asking for multiple refills like a full-on food vlogger. The following morning, he still gushes about the curry, making Abel wonder if Rio has ever eaten decent meals before. When Rio teases that Abel must be hiding more juicy secrets, since he never mentioned the curry, Abel seems briefly caught off guard, hinting there might be truth to it. The pair resume their journey, passing through lush meadows and fertile farmlands, until they approach their next destination, the town of Lune. At the gate, the guard instantly recognizes Abel and reacts with shock, explaining there have been reports of his disappearance. Abel doesn't take the time to go into detail about the events but simply informs the guard that the man beside him saved his life. The guard expresses his gratitude to Rio for protecting Abel, shaking his hand enthusiastically. Since Rio has yet to register as an adventurer, he's required to pay an entrance fee, which Abel once again covers for him by handing over a silver coin to the guard. The guard greets Abel warmly, welcoming him back to town, and asks what his next plans are. While they chat, Rio notices that Abel seems well-known and on friendly terms with nearly everyone here. They head toward the Adventurers Guild first, and during the walk, Abel explains that newcomers usually start at rank F when they register. However, as an experienced adventurer himself, Abel believes he can vouch for Rio's abilities, potentially allowing him to begin at rank E or even D. The ranking system here works the same as elsewhere. Higher rank means access to tougher and more rewarding quests. Abel then remarks that Rio probably won't need to take on many quests anyway, since selling their large collection of magic stones would make him wealthy. In fact, they have so many that unloading them all at once might cause the market to collapse, so Abel plans to consult the guildmaster first to decide how to proceed. When they step into the guild, everyone inside reacts with surprise and joy at the sight of Abel alive and well. As people crowd around Abel, Rio smiles, amused that he's made such a popular acquaintance. Not wanting to get in the way, he slips outside for a walk. During his stroll, he encounters an elf girl who is curious about his clothing, identifying it as the attire of the Fairy King. Rio is baffled, having no clue who that is. The girl, in a hurry, leaves before explaining further, saying she hopes they meet again. Soon after, Abel finds Rio and brings him back inside, proudly introducing him as the man who saved his life. The crowd voices their happiness and appreciation before returning to their activities. Abel then takes Rio to the guild's front desk to register him, recommending him for D rank directly. The receptionist is stunned, explaining that someone from the Crimson Sword, Abel's renowned party, has never personally endorsed anyone before. This means Rio must be extraordinary. She agrees to the rank but notes that Rio must still pass a physical evaluation. Abel then requests a meeting with the guildmaster. The receptionist leads them to a meeting room, and Hugh, the guildmaster, bursts in upon hearing Abel has returned. He's astonished they managed to cross that mountain and survive. Abel points out that such a feat should be more than enough proof of Rio's skills, and asks if that can justify granting him the higher rank. Hugh acknowledges Rio's capability and agrees to promote his rank. Before their discussion could wrap up, a group bursts into the office. Among them are members of Abel's party, Lynn, Warren, and Rio himself. Upon spotting Abel and confirming he is truly alive, Lynn collapses to her knees, overwhelmed at the sight she never thought she'd witness again. Abel rises, walks over to them, and apologizes for the trouble his situation caused. He makes it clear that without Rio's intervention, he wouldn't have survived, so the gratitude should be directed toward Rio. Realizing the group needs time to reconnect, Hugh excuses himself, instructing the guild clerk, Nina, to prepare the necessary registration documents while letting the party keep the room for their reunion. Rio moves to leave with Hugh, but Abel stops him, telling him there's something they need to do together later, and to wait at the guild once his registration is complete. As Rio departs, Hugh reads his thoughts and notices his confusion over Abel's fame. Hugh explains that Abel's team, the Crimson Sword, is the top-ranked party in the village, and his absence had left a noticeable void. When Rio asks if his rank will be D, Hugh confirms it. He admits to knowing how powerful Abel is, but also notes that even a warrior of Abel's caliber wouldn't have succeeded against those monsters without strong allies, proof to Hugh that Rio is highly skilled and deserving of the same rank. He then leads Rio to a different office, where Nina soon arrives with the registration materials. Leaving Nina in charge, Hugh focuses on his own guild paperwork. Nina introduces herself and opens a large book, asking for key details, Rio's abilities, current level, and whether he's ventured into a dungeon before. Upon hearing he hasn't, she informs him of the monthly dungeon training sessions and offers to enroll him in the next one. Rio accepts, and she tells him the upcoming class will be held in a few days at 9 o'clock. Surprised by the use of specific time, Rio learns there's a large clock in the city center. Since he has nowhere to stay, Nina offers lodging at the guild for 300 days following his registration. After finishing the paperwork, she hands him his new card and instructs him to place his palm on a device, which imprints his data onto the card and completes the process. Leaving the office, Hugh expresses relief at Abel's return, grumbling about how chaotic the city had been during his absence. Rio rejoins Abel, who begins showing him around. Abel says they'll be collecting payment for the stones they sold, and that he plans to buy clothes and a staff for Rio. Rio appreciates the thought but questions the need for a staff, insisting he's fine without one since he already carries a sword. Skeptical, Abel asks to see it, only to find what he considers a mere dagger. Rio insists it's a sword and that he's proficient with it. Abel, baffled by Rio's lifestyle and outlook, realizes there are many things he doesn't yet understand about him. As they shop and talk, Rio learns the world follows a calendar much like Earth's, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, and 30 days in a month. Combined with familiar foods like curry, he suspects another person from Earth may have been reincarnated there and altered the culture. When Abel finishes his purchases, Rio thanks him for the generosity. Abel then reveals they have one more destination, and as the guest of honor, Rio cannot decline. He's led to a welcome celebration in his honor, where the night is spent eating, drinking, and enjoying the company. The next morning, he wakes up feeling drained. Taking a stroll back to his lodge alongside Nina, she teases that he must have enjoyed quite an eventful night. She mentions that Ra, said to be Abel's brother, stayed close to Rio the whole evening out of gratitude for what Rio had done for them. But that wasn't the real reason for Rio's unease. His real problem was how much alcohol he had consumed the night before. Eventually, they arrive at the lodge, and Nina pushes the door open. Inside, two people are already settled. Nina introduces Rio as their final roommate. The two, Niels and Ito, greet him warmly. Before heading out, Nina reminds Rio about his upcoming class the next day. As soon as she leaves, Niels remarks on how attractive she is. Ito, uninterested in Niels' daydreams, turns to Rio to chat instead. They trade introductions and agree to keep things relaxed while living together. A moment later, there's another knock. Nina has brought one more roommate, Eamon. She appears quite young, so they ask her age. She reveals she's 16 and explains that after losing her parents, she decided to become an adventurer to support herself. Nina tells them to make her feel welcome and once again reminds Rio about joining her for class tomorrow. Meanwhile, Abel speaks to his party about what he saw Rio do, casting spells without a staff, creating ice to slay wyverns, and more. Lin, one of the members, scoffs at the claim, explaining that magic requires careful control of range and position, so such feats would be impossible. Abel insists it happened exactly as he described, repeating the detail about killing wyverns with ice blocks. Lin still calls it impossible. Then Ria, another teammate, remarks that such strength has only been spoken of in legends, specifically about the so-called Inferno magician. They all dismiss the tales as exaggerated stories since no one truly saw the magician in action. However, a concern arises. If Rio is truly that powerful, could he become a threat or side with the Empire? Abel assures them that Rio despises the name of the Darbuhi Empire, so that possibility is out of the question. Elsewhere, Rio is laughing and chatting with his new companions, reflecting on how much his circumstances have shifted. After a period of training, their lesson ends, and Rio is thrilled to finally be permitted to explore the dungeon. This will be his first dungeon hunt, and he's eager for it. A man, sitting next to him, feels differently. She's nervous about going inside and doubts they're ready. Rio tries to reassure her, saying it's not a big deal and that he's going to enjoy it, though her nervousness is still clear. Their instructor asks if anyone has questions. Rio raises his hand and inquires whether it's possible to use a skill to skip from a cleared dungeon floor directly to an uncleared one. Impressed, the teacher explains that while such a skill exists in other dungeons, it cannot be used in this particular one. The instructor praises him, and a man also comes to realize that he possesses impressive strength. Turning to Rio, she asks where he learned such skills, but he simply assures her it's nothing to worry about and that she will gain the same knowledge in due time. To wrap up the lesson, they will be heading into a dungeon for some hands-on experience. Their teacher explains that he will personally lead them inside, and soon they set off. Upon reaching the entrance, he points out that this particular dungeon is located right in the heart of their town. In fact, the entire community's daily life is centered around it. Because of this, any major disturbance inside the dungeon could easily threaten the safety of the city. For protection, there are 2 layers of gates, one as a precaution and the other as a last defense, so that even during dangerous situations, civilians remain safe. The teacher also mentions an annual event known as the Great Tidal Boar, during which monster activity drastically increases, turning the dungeon into a fierce battleground. These creatures are capable of detonating upon defeat, making the gates all the more essential to shield the city. Ryo is surprised that the danger could escalate to such extremes, while a man grows uneasy at the thought of constant possible attacks. Seeing her worry, the teacher reassures her that such a threat is still far off. At the dungeon entrance, he shows them a desk managed by a guild secretary, where all entrants must sign in with their names and the time they enter. However, since they arrived under guild supervision, they are exempt from registering. Entering further, the teacher informs them that the first level of the dungeon has already been cleared, so they can move around without immediate threat, but they must remain alert and close together to avoid accidents. A man sticks close to Ryo as they explore. Eventually, they arrive at a dimly lit area, which signals danger. Ryo draws a man's attention to it, and they ready themselves for combat. When the enemy appears, it turns out to be a soldier ant. Ryo traps it with ice, giving a man the chance to strike. A man approaches, and with the creature immobilized, lands a sword blow that kills it. Ryo is pleased with the outcome, though he doesn't consider it remarkable since his ice had secured the victory. He then suggests they take the ant's crystal as loot to exchange for money. A man, unfamiliar with the finer points of adventuring, hadn't realized they could do that, so Ryo reminds her that adventurers rely on such earnings to cover their expenses. They exit the dungeon, both feeling accomplished by the day's events. Back at the guild, their dorm mates, Niels and Ito, greet them warmly and propose celebrating. They share drinks, non-alcoholic, of course, since alcohol is prohibited within the guild, and chat about the rule's purpose. It's clear Niels would rather toast with something stronger, but adventurers can't afford the risk of impaired judgment. Niels congratulates them on acquiring a crystal during their first outing, though a man downplays her role, insisting it was all thanks to Ryo's powers. Ryo counters, pointing out that her strike was also essential to the win. Amon admits he intends to head back to the dungeon the following day and even explore the upper layer, but he's uneasy about going alone. Fortunately, Ryo mentions that he also plans to visit the dungeon the next day. His goal is to reach the second layer, so he proposes they team up for the trip. During their conversation, Ryo shares his unease after encountering an ant in the first layer, since his lessons had taught him that only bats appear there. Niels chimes in, noting that there have been circulating rumors about ants moving into both the first and second layers, which makes the situation a little worrisome. Just then, Abel shows up in time to calm their nerves. He explains that the ants manage to appear in other layers simply because they can climb down, meaning there's no real threat. Abel jokes with them, which lightens the mood. Niels doesn't recognize Abel until Ryo says his name. The moment he realizes who Abel is, he jumps to his feet for a handshake, thrilled to finally meet someone he has admired for ages. Abel tells them he's just returned from a mission and needs to make his report. Before he can spend more time with them, his teammates arrive and remind him they're due to meet the guild master. Not wanting to leave, Abel hesitates, so Warren hoists him onto his shoulders and carries him off. Meanwhile, Lin keeps gazing at Ryo, which makes Ryo uncomfortable enough to grab her arm and say they should get going as well. While walking, Ryo questions Lin about her staring. Lin replies that after all the stories they've heard about Ryo's abilities, she's intrigued to see for herself if he's really that strong. Abel assures them they'll get to watch him in action eventually, so there's no need to be impatient. The next morning, Amon wakes brimming with anticipation for the day's battles. He dashes out, but Ryo tells him to take it easy. They make their way to the dungeon, where they enjoy cutting down any monster that crosses their path. Their coordination proves that teamwork truly makes them unstoppable. Partway through, Amon starts feeling short of breath. Ryo steps in to help, extending a hand to pull him up so he can take a break. Impressed by Amon's swordsmanship, Ryo asks where he learned such skill. Amon had previously mentioned being taught by a schoolteacher, but Ryo can tell these moves are too advanced for a non-adventurer. Amon then reveals his mentor, Kiro, was a master swordsman trained at an academy in the city. Curious, Ryo presses for details and learns Kiro was from Hume School. Ryo praises his technique but points out that it's a style that requires a lot of stamina. With more practice and experience, Amon will be able to handle it more efficiently, since becoming a true swordsman takes dedication, not just fighting. The discussion shifts to Ryo's abilities. While Amon knows him primarily as a mage, he's equally impressed by his sword skills. He asks if Ryo had a teacher, and Ryo answers yes, without mentioning anything about the Fairy King. After wrapping up their pleasant chat, Ryo shares with Amon the story of his journey with Abel, mentioning how Abel wakes at dawn each day to train with his sword. If someone as powerful as Abel maintains daily discipline, then Amon should remain equally committed. The talk leaves a strong impression, and once they've rested, they head back home. The next morning, Ryo prepares to go out. His housemates ask if he's heading to the dungeon, but he explains he has other plans. He makes his way to the library, taken aback by its massive size. It's his first time seeing such a library in this world, and he's impressed. The librarian leads him to the alchemy section, his main interest, and suggests starting there to make learning easier. Following her advice, he chooses 2 books, planning to read them. Stepping outside, he considers buying the book so he can read at his own pace. While he's thinking about the cost, he notices the moon sliding in front of the sun. At first, he assumes it's a solar eclipse, but something about it feels off. An uneasy feeling grips him, prompting him to stand and investigate. Out of nowhere, an immense blast of fire appears, hurtling straight toward him. Instinctively, fear washes over him, but his priority is survival. He conjures an ice wall to block the flames. The attacker, surprised to find a human in this place, shows no hesitation. She intends to kill him. She's horned and monstrous in appearance, and Ryo guesses she's an Akuma. Escape seems impossible, so he focuses on defense, summoning another wall of ice to stop the next wave of fire before taking to the air with ice-formed wings. A shot grazes his coat, but the garment shields him from harm. The attacker is startled, recognizing the coat as something belonging to the Fairy King. Still, she advances, determined to end him. Ryo draws his sword, and for several minutes they engage in a fierce duel. She acknowledges his strength and skill, also noting the Fairy King's weapon. She demands to know who he is, given such favor. In response, he strikes back, launching ice lances, but she dodges at incredible speed, riding the wind to boost her movements. She rushes in again, but he evades and counters with an unexpected attack. She dodges, mocking his efforts. The moon slowly shifts away from the sun, and she throws up a barrier to shield herself, but one of his blows still lands, cutting her face. Thinking she's vulnerable, Ryo leaps in to finish the fight, only for her to retaliate fiercely. They clash midair before crashing down together. Acting fast, Ryo lands another strike and slams her into the ground. She emerges back to the surface, her appearance now that of a true demon. The moon has almost completely passed from the sun's view, signaling her time is nearly over. She admits it was an excellent battle and wishes it could have continued, but her time limit has run out. Fortunately, he has no interest in continuing either. She explains that the event they just experienced was a cloister, something she has no control over. She then introduces herself as Leonore and asks for his name in return. He answers by calling her Akuma, which instantly tells her he knows her true identity. She expresses hope that they will face each other again someday, though he clearly doesn't want that. Before leaving, she warns that he will inevitably face other Akumas, but she hopes she will be the one to end his life. The sunlight fully returns, and she vanishes. Ryo feels relieved to have survived the encounter and grateful for the coat that shielded him. Without it, he's certain a deadly wound would have pierced his heart. Determined to acquire the book he needs, he heads to withdraw some funds. After making the withdrawal, he checks his account and is surprised by the amount left. The guild master had mentioned that the crystals they recovered were worth a lot, but he hadn't expected them to be that valuable. Heading home, he's pleased that he won't need to work for money for some time. But he's surprised to find his roommates absent. As he sets out to retrieve his book, he spots them through a window. To his shock, some fellow adventurers have ambushed and injured his companions. The gang's leader arrogantly says there's no need for warning before a fight, since monsters never warn either. In response, Ryo strikes them from behind and reminds them that warnings work both ways. After the tense encounter, he and his roommates head to wash up. The priest among them treats Ryo's shoulder injury, astonished that despite its severity, no bones are broken. They ask who he fought, but he keeps silent. All he feels is gratitude for surviving and hope for calmer days ahead. Meanwhile, Ryo's roommates are deep in the dungeon. After a hard fight, they bring down a goblin archer. Ito tends to Eamon's wounds with lesser heal, while Nils collects loot from the fallen goblins. They're currently on the dungeon's 5th layer, but Ito finds it odd for a goblin archer to appear at such a beginner level. Feeling uneasy, Nils insists they head back and split the loot equally. Eamon, still full of stamina, wants to continue, but Nils, who follows his idol Abel's advice to prioritize survival above all, stands firm and persuades them to return. On their way back, Eamon remarks that if Rio had joined them, they could have gone deeper into the dungeon without trouble. At that moment, Rio is outside the city, clearing his mind, replaying his battle with the demon swordswoman Akuma Leonore. He can't deny the overwhelming strength of Leonore's magic, though he believes their casting speeds are on par. To win next time, he must increase his own power, eliminate his weaknesses, and devise a counter to Leonore's incredible movement speed, something she can amplify tenfold with wind magic. Since Rio lacks wind magic, he wonders if water magic could help him move faster. He recalls using his water jet spell to swim faster underwater but isn't sure how to adapt it for land. Staring at his feet, he remembers ice skating. If he freezes the ground, it would remove friction entirely, and combined with the water jet, might allow him to accelerate. When he tests the theory, it fails miserably, making him abandon the idea for now, though he doesn't lose hope completely. Resolving to refine the method later, he returns to town, planning a future visit to the library to study Akumas and alchemy. Abel's companion, Lynn, is at the library, rummaging through the forbidden spellbook section. She's searching for any clue that could support Abel's story about Rio conjuring a massive airborne ice wall and launching ice spears that tore through the wyvern's defenses, something she finds incredibly hard to believe. Sure, she could just walk up to Rio and ask him to demonstrate his supposedly overpowered magic, but her pride won't allow it. After all, her own master, whom she views as one of the most skilled magicians alive, can't perform magic anywhere near that level. To her, Abel must be exaggerating. While she's there, an elven woman named Sarah, a frequent visitor to the library, approaches and greets her. Sarah remarks that it's rare to see Lynn in this place, prompting Lynn to explain she's just here for research but hasn't found what she's after. Lynn briefly considers asking Sarah for help but ultimately decides against involving her in something that might not even be true. Instead, she changes the subject, asking when Sarah came back to Loom. Sarah explains she just returned from a mission in the royal capital. Sarah mentions she has an envoy waiting and excuses herself, leaving Lynn slightly disappointed that their conversation ended so quickly. Meanwhile, Niels, Ito, and the others return to the Adventurers Guild, stopping at the reception desk where Nina is stationed. True to form, Niels freezes up when speaking to the attractive receptionist, so Ito steps in to report their haul. He shows her several large magic crystals taken from goblin archers they encountered on the 5th layer. Nina is immediately unsettled. Goblin archers have never been recorded on the 5th layer before. Alarmed, she hurries to inform the guildmaster, thanking the newcomers for the valuable intel. Hugh listens to her report and notes that goblin archers usually appear no higher than the 10th layer. To him, this is a potential warning sign of a looming disaster. He asks Nina whether any B-rank parties are currently in Loom to deal with possible threats. Nina replies that both the Crimson Sword Party and the White Brigade Party are in town, with the latter having returned just 2 days ago. Hugh instructs her to summon both groups for a meeting. When Nina passes the message to Crimson Sword, Abel hesitates upon hearing that White Brigade will be there as well. Although Abel knows Phelps, White Brigade's leader, he still feels uneasy. Nevertheless, he and his teammates make their way to the Guildmaster's office, where they find White Brigade already waiting. Phelps greets Abel confidently, and Abel responds, albeit awkwardly. With everyone gathered, Hugh thanks them for coming and outlines the situation. Abel is shocked to hear that goblin archers truly appeared on the 5th layer and asks Hugh if he's absolutely certain. Hugh assures him there's no mistake. Understanding the gravity of the matter, Phelps asks what their next move should be. Hugh explains that he wants both parties to immediately enter the dungeon to check for any early signs of a great tidal bore, a dangerous phenomenon where monster populations surge uncontrollably. Since it has been nearly 10 years since the last occurrence, Hugh believes it's plausible that another is approaching Loom. Rhea agrees that the strange monster sightings could signal the start of such an event and supports the plan. Hugh, naturally, intends to compensate them for their work. He hands over an advance payment of 100 gold coins and assures them that, once their mission is finished, they'll receive an additional 200. To make sure nothing is misunderstood, Abel once again asks Hugh to confirm that their sole task is to determine whether or not the great tidal bore is approaching. Hugh confirms, explaining that if they find proof of it, they must return to the surface immediately to inform the others so the dungeon gate can be sealed for a while. This would allow enough time to gather all available adventurers and the region's knights to prepare for the fight. Hugh adds that he has already spoken with the town's lord about the mission and his proposed defensive measures. Abel gets the feeling that Hugh suspects the war has already started, given the level of preparation. Hugh, however, explains that he simply wants to be ready for any worst-case scenario, and again instructs both the Crimson Sword and White Brigade to begin their descent into the dungeon first thing the following morning. Both groups agree to the job and leave with renewed determination. At dawn, everyone wakes in Rio's room, only to find he's already prepared to head out. Niels asks where he's going, and Rio says he plans to visit the library again, this time the Advanced Northern Wing, to study more about alchemy. Ito notes that only D-ranked adventurers can access that part of the library, which works out well for Rio as the story's main protagonist. Amon brings up rumors that the Northern Wing contains forbidden texts, which instantly sparks Rio's interest. After all, who wouldn't want to uncover secrets they're not supposed to know? Sadly, those books require at least a B rank to read. Rio calls it disappointing, but his friends assure him it won't take long for him to reach that rank. Motivated, Niels decides to make another dungeon run, and both Ito and Amon agree to join him. Rio sets off for the library and begins wandering around the northern section, unsure where to locate material on Akumas. As he heads up to the second floor, he unexpectedly meets Sarah and is immediately struck by her beauty. At the same time, Abel's party and Phelps's party arrive at the dungeon gate. Phelps has recruited 20 people for this mission, most of them C-ranked adventurers. With everyone assembled, Hugh moves to open the gate, but Abel stops him, sensing trouble the moment the doors are unsealed. Acting cautiously, he tells Lin to use a wind-based probe spell to scout the dungeon's first layer. Lin does so and detects several hundred monsters gathered right at the entrance. This confirms the Great Tidal Bore has already begun. Hugh orders everyone to retreat and spread the word to the knights and adventurers to mobilize at once. The gates are shut, and Niels' team, arriving at the guild just then, hears the news that monsters are pouring out of the dungeon. With the entire town needing to respond, Niels' team also heads for the dungeon's outer wall. Meanwhile, Rio, oblivious to the unfolding chaos, is still gazing at Sarah. She remembers seeing him when he first came to town and takes this moment to formally introduce herself. She asks if he's searching for anything in particular. Not wanting to mention his run-in with an Akuma, Rio instead talks about his interest in alchemy, specifically methods that could help him create a golem. Sarah leads him toward the section containing books on golem making, and as they walk, they chat. Rio learns that Sarah is an adventurer too, part of a party named Win, but sadly, she is its only member. At the dungeon entrance, everything is under full lockdown. Adventurers have assembled behind the first defensive wall, bracing for the moment the creatures break through. Moments later, the gate shatters under the pressure of the initial wave, and the stationed archers immediately unleash a volley of arrows. Among the attacking horde are goblin archers, whose counterfire wounds several adventurers, though the battle presses on. Reinforcements arrive as Commander Neville charges in with his contingent of knights. Q quickly notices the sheer scale of the enemy force. It's far greater than anything they faced during the last Tidal Bore event, even after prolonged fighting. The enemy numbers refuse to dwindle, prompting Q to suspect that a goblin boss is about to appear. Neil relays Hugh's urgent order to Abel, instructing him to ready his team for the incoming boss battle. Being only F-rank adventurers, Niels, Ito, and a man can't contribute much to the front lines, so they assist others by delivering supplies and aiding the wounded. As the sun dips toward the horizon, the majority of monsters lie defeated, but Hugh senses that the sudden quiet is unnatural. Certain the boss is about to emerge, he orders both the White Brigade and the Crimson Sword to prepare. They move into position in front of the gate, clearing out weaker monsters so they won't interfere later. Just as expected, an enormous goblin, dubbed the Gigachad Goblin, steps forward, wielding a massive longsword. Abel sizes him up and concludes he's a goblin general. Phelps predicts that killing him will end the fight, but that hope is short-lived. 2 more goblin generals appear. This all but confirms a goblin king is lurking behind the lines, ready to arrive in the final wave. Abel and Phelps engage 2 of the generals, while Rhea and Sheena prepare to take on the 3rd. Before they can finish them, a sudden slicing wind cleaves all 3 generals in half. The source, a casual swing from the Goblin King himself, steps into the fray. Now, only Abel and Phelps have the strength to face him head-on. Using his signature ability, Perfect Shadow, Abel silently closes the gap and drives his blade into the Goblin King's chest. The attack wounds but does not kill. Lin, who has been charging up a potent spell, follows with a relentless downpour of magical bullets, riddling the king's body until he collapses. With the Goblin King slain, the battle is declared won, and amusingly, the main character hasn't even been involved. Unbeknownst to the celebrating adventurers, something even more menacing still lurks deep within the dungeon, perhaps far worse than the Goblin King. At the guild hall, a victory feast is held. Ria arrives looking bewildered, clearly unaware of what unfolded. Elsewhere, Guildmaster Hugh sits buried in paperwork, uneasy about the royal capital scholars soon arriving to investigate the incident, fearing the fallout could surpass the chaos of the tidal bore. Later, when Rio learns from his companions that the tidal bore crisis ended without him realizing it, he half jokes about whether he's truly the story's main hero. Niels excitedly recounts Abel's fierce clash with the Goblin King. Abel soon shows up, joining Lin and Ria, who have been searching for him. Lin, slightly annoyed, notes that Abel's been spending most of his time with Rio lately. Ria picks up on an undercurrent of bitterness behind the girls' polite smiles. They don't seem eager to have him around Abel, but he keeps the conversation light. Lin seizes the moment to ask if Rio can really summon an ice wall high up in the sky. When he confirms, she presses further, asking if it's a modification of an existing technique or an entirely original spell. From her knowledge, no one in this world has achieved such a feat. Rio admits he's unfamiliar with the concept of original spells, prompting Lin to explain that they bypass standard incantations in favor of unique chants crafted by the caster. Rio still doesn't quite get it. He doesn't use incantations at all, leaving Lin stunned. The following morning, Rio's companions head to the guild in search of new requests, only to discover that the notice board is completely empty. When Rio arrives, he questions why they aren't already in the dungeon. Niels informs him that the dungeon is currently shut down for maintenance and will remain closed for several weeks. Because of this, they decided to focus on standard guild requests instead. However, with a large number of adventurers in town, jobs get snatched up quickly, leaving almost nothing for them. They then turn the question on Rio, wondering why he's out and about instead of staying tucked away in his usual spot. Rio explains that he's been searching for magical ores to use in his alchemy practice, but unfortunately, every last one in the marketplace has already been bought. Realizing they're all in a similar situation, Rio offers to hire the three of them to gather magic ores for him instead. Ito recalls an abandoned mine located near a southern village, about a 12-hour trek from here. Rio decides that's manageable and proposes for gold coins for each of them, plus an additional 25 gold for every magic copper ore they manage to bring back. The generous payment makes it clear Rio has deep pockets, and his friends happily accept. Once they head off, Rio returns to his quarters, only to hear shouting outside. When he peers out the window, he spots several knights harassing a young woman, making crude threats while laughing obnoxiously. A local adventurer steps in to protect her, but the group's leader moves to eliminate him first. As he draws his weapon, his foot suddenly slips out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. When he tries to rise, he loses balance again and smacks his face against the dirt. At that moment, Phelps, captain of the White Brigade, arrives and sternly scolds the knights for assaulting civilians when their role is supposed to be protecting them. The knights show no remorse and seem to have a general disdain for adventurers, prompting them to try and provoke Phelps as well. But Phelps stops them cold, revealing that he is the heir to House Heinlein, a noble family whose head, his father, once commanded the Royal Knights. This revelation makes the knights back down instantly, knowing the consequences of crossing him. The rescued adventurer, Dan, and the frightened girl both express their gratitude to Phelps. He praises Dan for his courage and urges him to keep standing against wrongdoing. Phelps then assigns Dan the task of escorting the girl to her companions, and the two depart. After they're gone, Phelps glances upward and greets Rio, introducing himself. He then reveals that he knows it was Rio's subtle ice magic that froze the knight's footwear, causing the embarrassing fall. Phelps thanks him for stepping in but quickly excuses himself, explaining that he has other matters to attend to. As Phelps leaves with his ally Sheena, Rio can't help but wonder why the son of a noble family chose the life of an adventurer. That night, Rio is having dinner by himself when Abel suddenly shows up to interrupt him. Abel takes a seat, but Rio immediately warns him that he won't be paying for his food. The conversation shifts as Rio teases Abel about his love life, pointing out how Lin always seems jealous when she sees the two of them together. Abel corrects him, saying Lin only has feelings for Warren, another member of his team. Rio playfully suggests Abel should try courting him instead, which makes Abel flustered and plead for him to stop talking so casually about such things. Rio then adopts a more serious tone and asks what Abel is doing out here by himself so late. Abel explains that he's been assigned a job and doesn't want to handle it alone, so he's come to ask for Rio's help. On their way to the task, Abel explains that a team of investigators recently arrived in the city, including someone he knows personally. This acquaintance travels with several royal guards, but a few of them have wandered into the entertainment district. Abel's been entrusted with bringing them back before they cause any problems. Rio spots two suspicious-looking men in the distance, clearly not from the area. Abel notices this too and quietly trails them into a dim back alley, where the pair is suddenly attacked. Without even glancing back, Rio effortlessly blocks the strike and instantly knocks out every assailant by dropping a massive block of ice onto them. While searching the scene, Abel picks up an alchemical device. The moment Rio hears an alchemy, his interest flares, but Abel refuses to hand over something so dangerous to this troublemaker. Instead, he focuses on identifying the attackers. Abel discovers an identification card showing that they are C-ranked adventurers from Giclare, the capital of Handelieu. He can't figure out why they came here, but decides to bind them and turn them over to the town guard later. Elsewhere, Phelps is being shadowed by the same corrupt knights from earlier. Before they can spring their ambush, they're suddenly frozen in place and then incinerated in a burst of fire. The culprit is revealed to be Sheena, who utterly annihilates them. Phelps keeps walking, completely unfazed, as though he had expected her to deal with the matter from the beginning. The kingdom soon faces a pressing matter when an Imperial investigation party arrives, accompanied by several attendants. Leading them are Hilarion and Clive from the Royal Central University, tasked with probing the dungeon after the Great Tidal Ball. Meanwhile, Rio also makes his way to the dungeon only to discover that it has been sealed off until further notice. The truth is that Hilarion's group has consumed much of the kingdom's supplies and now intends to reopen the dungeon despite its closure after the Tidal Ball. Q reads a letter from the Emperor declaring Hilarion a minister in the city, granting him authority over kingdom operations during post-war periods. Q is baffled. Why strip their supplies and demand the dungeon be reopened? They also claim to require adventurers for this mission. Though Clive explains to Hugh that these are Imperial orders, Hugh refuses, saying the request is unreasonable. Seeing the deadlock, Hilarion apologizes for using the supplies and promises repayment. That eases Hugh's frustration, but he remains wary about reopening the dungeon. When Clive presses the matter, Hugh relents but makes it clear that neither the adventurers nor the guild will take responsibility for whatever happens inside, knowing how dangerous it can be. Clive struggles with this compromise, but Hilarion proposes hiring adventurers at standard rates to join their investigation. Hugh warns that not every adventurer will accept and reminds them that post-Tidal Ball dungeons are unpredictable and require extreme caution. At the same time, Rio heads to meet Abel's group, lingering near their door until a young girl suddenly bursts in and darts about. She approaches Rio, asking if he's an adventurer, and insists she must get to the guild immediately. Rio is reluctant, saying he's hungry, but she pleads, explaining she has an urgent delivery. Rio finally escorts her to Abel, where she hands over a letter from Hilarion. After reading it, Abel learns that Hilarion is offering them a place in the dungeon investigation team. Abel feels uneasy, while Rio mentions the dungeon's closure. Abel explains that in history, following a great tidal ball, an elite team of adventurers vanished within the dungeon. That group wasn't ordinary. It was led by someone whose strength was compared to that of a Superman. No one truly knows why they vanished or where they went, so ever since the massive tidal surge, people have steered clear of the dungeon. Rio doesn't care about the mystery, he only cares about getting a meal. He excuses himself, and the young woman quietly follows him with her gaze. Once Rio leaves, she introduces herself as Natalie, giving her full name. Lynn instantly realizes she belongs to a renowned family known for producing powerful water mags. Lynn asks if she's ever heard of a mage capable of creating a towering water wall from a great distance. Natalie admits she hasn't, surprising the group that Lynn is still fixated on Rio's abilities. Even Natalie is taken aback at the idea someone could cast such magic. The party members then explain to her that Rio himself can perform that feat. Abel warns the group that under no circumstances should they challenge Rio. He believes that even if they all joined forces, they wouldn't be able to defeat him. He advises Natalie that if she ever needs assistance and his team is unavailable, she should seek Rio out. When Rio returns home, his housemates tell him the dungeon will soon reopen. He reminds them that entry is restricted to adventurers rank D or higher, so they aren't eligible to participate, though they can still attend the briefing scheduled for the next day. The following morning, Abel meets Hilarion and the rest of his team to prepare for dungeon exploration. Hilarion hands Abel a magical device that measures mana, and they get ready to head inside. Abel instructs them to explore only the first 7 floors for now, taking a slow and careful approach. Elsewhere, Rio and the others attend the briefing. Hugh informs everyone that only adventurers rank D or above can join the investigation. However, lower-ranked participants are welcome to volunteer for the supply team. Before the meeting wraps up, Rio asks about the color of the stones found inside the monsters killed during the tidal surge. Hugh answers that they were pale in color. Inside the dungeon, Abel's group spends several days searching without encountering a single monster, an alarming discovery. While puzzling over the strange absence, they spot Clive and the entire Royal Central University team hurrying past. Curious, they ask why, and Rio explains she heard they believe something important lies on the 38th floor. Clive's team races straight there until they come across a large black door. They have no clue what's beyond it, but Clive is thrilled to have found it first. He sets up his equipment and arranges his students in position. Once they activate their magic, the entire group vanishes. Natalie, monitoring them through a magical stone, suddenly loses their signal, leaving her stunned. Thanks for watching. If you like this anime recap, then please like, share and subscribe for the next part.